Imagine waking up at what your clock says is 8 a.m., but when you look outside, it's still pitch black. The stars are still visible in the sky. Get your kids ready for school in complete darkness, and they walk to class under streetlights. At lunchtime, the sun is just starting to rise. You eat dinner as the sun finally sets at midnight. This sounds like life in the Arctic Circle during winter, right? Wrong. This is everyday reality for millions of people living in Western China during the summer months. Here's what makes this so bizarre. China is enormous. It stretches over 3,250 miles from its eastern coast to its western borders. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the same distance as traveling from New York City all the way to Los Angeles. When you drive across the United States, you pass through 6 different time zones. Your watch changes as you cross invisible lines on the map. By the time you reach California, it's 3 hours earlier than it was back in New York. This makes sense because the Earth is round and the sun hits different parts of it at different times. But China doesn't work this way. Despite being just as wide as the United States, despite spanning a distance that geographically should cover 5 separate time zones, every single clock in China shows the exact same time. From the gleaming skyscrapers of Shanghai on the east coast to the ancient Silk Road cities of Kashgar in the far west, from the tropical beaches of Hainan Island in the south to the frigid forests bordering Russia in the north, every clock reads Beijing Standard Time. Over 1.4 billion people. It's covering one of the largest countries on Earth, all living by one single clock. This isn't an accident or an oversight. It's not because Chinese officials don't understand geography or how time zones work. This is one of the most deliberate political decisions in modern history. Made in 1949 when the Communist Party took power. Before that, China actually had 5 different time zones, just like you'd expect for a country this size. But the new government changed everything. They announced that the entire nation would now operate on Beijing Time and Beijing Time only. The official explanation was simple: national unity and administrative efficiency. One country, one time, one unified identity. But as we're about to discover, there's so much more to this story than convenience. Time in China has become a powerful symbol of control, identity, and political authority, and its effects are now reaching far beyond China's borders into the global arena. Let's start by understanding just how unusual China's decision really is. When you look at a world map showing time zones, you'll notice that most large countries are divided into multiple zones. Russia, the biggest country on Earth, has 11 different time zones. If you're in Moscow and you call someone in Vladivostok on the Pacific coast, they're 7 hours ahead of you. The United States, as we mentioned, has 6 time zones. Canada also has 6. Even Australia, which is smaller than China, uses 3 time zones. Kazakhstan, which borders China and is much smaller, still uses 2 different time zones. This is normal. This is how countries deal with the reality that the Earth rotates and the sun doesn't shine everywhere at once. China stands completely alone. It's the largest single time zone country in the entire world. No other major nation of comparable size has made this choice. The problems this creates are unsmall or theoretical. They massive and affect daily life in profound ways. Let's focus on Xinjiang, a province in China's far northwest. The capital city is Urumqi. If China followed natural geography like other countries, Urumqi would be on UTC +6, which is 6 hours ahead of Universal Coordinated Time. But instead, it operates on Beijing Time, which is UTC +8. That's a 2-hour difference, but it gets worse. The actual solar time in the westernmost parts of Xinjiang can be 3.5 hours behind Beijing. Think about what this means in practice. During summer months, the sun might not rise until 9:30 or even 10 in the morning, according to the clock. And sunset? That can happen close to midnight. The sky stays light until nearly 1 a.m. in some areas during peak summer. People aren't robots. They can't just ignore the sun. So Western Chinese residents have created workarounds. Government offices in Xinjiang typically open at 10 a.m. Beijing time and close at 7 p.m. Beijing time. That sounds late, but in terms of actual sunlight, it's basically 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. local solar time a normal workday. Television is even more interesting. Channels broadcasting in Mandarin Chinese follow Beijing time. But channels broadcasting in Uyghur or Kazakh languages quietly run on what locals call Xinjiang Time, which is 2 hours behind the official clock. When you make an appointment in cities like Kashgar or Urumqi, you have to specify which time you mean. "Let's meet at 3 p.m. isn't clear enough. You have to say 3 p.m. Beijing Time or 3 p.m. Xinjiang Time, otherwise people won't know when to show up. Bus schedules in some areas don't even bother with Beijing Time anymore. They just list departure times in the unofficial local time that actually matches when the sun is up. This creates a strange double reality where the official time and the live time exist side by side, constantly in tension with each other. To understand how China ended up with this unusual system, we need to go back in time. China's relationship with standardized time actually began in the 1870s in Shanghai. French Catholic missionaries had built an observatory in the Shujiahui district, and they started providing time services to the city. By the 1880s, officials in the Shanghai French concession were giving time announcements for ships. Using Shanghai mean solar time, this was useful for trade and navigation. But China, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, was falling apart. The Qing dynasty was crumbling. Foreign powers had carved out pieces of Chinese territory as concessions areas they controlled directly. Britain, France, Germany, Japan, and others all held parts of China. Meanwhile, regional warlords fought each other for control of different provinces. China wasn't really one unified country anymore. It was fragmented. In 1918, the government of the Republic of China tried to bring some order to this chaos by proposing 5 official time zones. They gave them specific names: Kunlun, Xinjiang Tibet, Gansu Sichuan, Chengwan, and Chengpai. These zones ranged from UTC plus 5.5 hours to UTC plus 8.5 hours. In 1947, they refined the system slightly. This made geographical sense. It recognized that China was wide enough to need multiple time zones. But then came one of the most devastating periods in Chinese history. From the 1920s through 1949, China was consumed by civil war. The Nationalist Party, or Kuomintang, fought against the Communist Party for control of the country. In the middle of this, Japan invaded and occupied huge portions of China from 1937 to 1945, committing horrific atrocities. Millions died. The country's infrastructure was destroyed. By the time the fighting finally ended in 1949 with communist victory, China was exhausted, traumatized, and desperately fragmented. The new leader, Mao Zedong, faced an enormous challenge. He had to somehow unify a country that had been torn apart for decades. China contained dozens of different ethnic groups who spoke different languages. Many regions had long histories of independence or resistance to central control. How do you make all these different peoples feel like they belong to one nation? Part of Mao's answer was symbolic unity. On September 27, 1949, just days after officially declaring the founding of the People's Republic of China, the government made an announcement. All of China would now operate on Beijing Standard Time. The 5 time zones were gone, effective immediately. The message was powerful and clear. China is one country. Beijing is the capital and the center of power, and regional differences would be subordinated to national unity. Even time itself would bend to the will of the new state. Every clock in the country would tick in unison with Beijing. The idea of national unity through a single time zone sounds powerful on paper. But what does it actually mean for the billion-plus people who have to live with it every day? The answer depends entirely on where in China you live. If you're in Beijing, Shanghai, or any of the major cities along China's eastern coast, Beijing Standard Time feels completely natural. The sun rises around 6 a.m. during summer. People wake up, have breakfast, and head to work around 8 or 9 a.m. Lunch happens around noon when the sun is high in the sky. The sun sets at a reasonable evening hour, maybe 7 or 8 p.m. Families eat dinner, watch television, and go to bed. The rhythm of the clock matches the rhythm of the sun. Everything feels normal because you're living near Beijing, where the time zone is actually designed for. But travel westway, west to cities like Kashgar in Xinjiang province, and the experience becomes surreal, almost dystopian. People who've lived there describe summer sunsets happening at midnight or even later. Not because they're anywhere near the Arctic Circle where the sun stays up for months, but simply because Beijing time forces them to live 3 hours ahead of where the sun actually is in their sky. This isn't just inconvenient or annoying. Scientists who study circadian rhythms, our body's natural clock, have found that living significantly out of sync with your local solar time can have real health consequences. Your body wants to wake up when the sun rises and wind down when it sets. That's how humans evolved. When you force people to live on a clock that's hours off from the sun, it can disrupt sleep patterns. Some research suggests it may increase risks for certain health problems, can affect mood and productivity. Some economists have even argued that if Western Chinese regions were allowed to use their natural local time, it could boost their economic efficiency because people would be working during their body's optimal hours. Think about children in Xinjiang going to school. In the winter, they might be walking to class in complete darkness because morning. According to Beijing, time has unaligned with morning, according to the sun. Workers start their jobs before dawn breaks. The fundamental disconnect between what the clock says and what the natural environment indicates creates what researchers call temporal dislocation, living in one time while everything around you suggests you should be in another. Now here's where it gets even more politically sensitive. Xinjiang isn't just geographically distant from Beijing. It's also culturally distinct. The region is home to the Uyghurs, a Turkic ethnic group with their own language, traditions, and predominantly Muslim faith. For many Uyghurs, being forced to live on Beijing time isn't just about sunrise and sunset. It represents something deeper. Cultural erasure and control imposed by a distant government dominated by Han Chinese, China's majority ethnic group. The time zone becomes a daily, unavoidable reminder that Beijing sets the rules. And local people must adapt heaven when those rules contradict the reality of the sun above their heads. The single time zone policy has its greatest political significance in China's most sensitive border regions. Xinjiang in the northwest and Tibet in the southwest. These aren't just remote areas on the map. They're places where Chinese sovereignty and control are most contested, most fragile, and most important to Beijing. Look at Xinjiang's position on a map. It borders 8 different countries: Mongolia, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. It's incredibly strategic. The region is also rich in natural resources, including oil and gas, and it's home to multiple ethnic minority groups, not just Uyghurs, but also Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and others who have complicated, often tense relationships with the central government in Beijing. Chinese scholars and government officials have been surprisingly open about the political function of the single time zone. One expert explicitly stated that it reinforces the official narrative of a Chinese nation united under the rule of the Communist Party. Another noted it's used to instill a sense of interconnection and control. These aren't secrets. The time zone is openly acknowledged as a tool of political integration. Think about how this works in practice. When every government office across China operates on the same schedule, when all official news broadcasts air simultaneously nationwide, when all economic data gets reported in real time using one standard, it creates operational unity. A bureaucrat in Beijing and a bureaucrat in Kashgar are at least theoretically working the same hours, participating in the same national rhythm. It makes administration easier for the central government. But beyond practical efficiency, there's profound symbolism. By forcing Kashgar to wake up on Beijing's clock, by making Tibet schedule its entire day around the capital's rhythm, the message gets embedded into the fabric of daily life. Beijing is the center. Everything flows from Beijing. Even something as fundamental as time, which should be determined by the sun and the Earth's rotation, is instead determined by political authority. This takes on even more weight when you consider other policies the Chinese government has implemented in these regions. In Xinjiang particularly, the government has built extensive surveillance systems with cameras and checkpoints. There have been reports of mass detention centers where Uyghurs have been held for re-education. Religious practices have been restricted. The Chinese government describes these measures as necessary for combating terrorism and separatism. Critics call it cultural genocide. The time zone policy, while much less severe than detention camps, fits into this same broader framework, asserting central authority over regions that might prefer more autonomy. Yet here's what's fascinating. Despite all this power, despite complete government control over official timekeeping, Xinjiang time persists. People still use it informally. They schedule their social lives, their prayers, their family gatherings around the sun, not around Beijing's clock. You can mandate what the official time is, but you cannot fully control how people organize their lived experience. The sun rises when it rises, regardless of what any government declares. This persistence of informal local time demonstrates the limits of even authoritarian power. China's time zone policy might seem like a purely domestic issue, but its implications are increasingly reaching beyond China's borders, especially through the country's most ambitious foreign policy project, the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI. Launched by President Xi Jinping in 2013, the Belt and Road Initiative is staggering in scope. It's a multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure development program connecting over 150 countries across Asia, Europe, Africa, Latin America, and beyond. China is financing and building railways, highways, ports, power plants, telecommunications networks, and more. The stated goal is to create modern Silk Roads, both overland and maritime, that will facilitate trade and connect the world. It's the largest infrastructure project in human history. Now, what does this have to do with time zones? More than you might think. These massive construction projects require coordination across multiple countries, each with their own time zones. But the companies doing the building are often Chinese. The financing comes from Chinese banks. The project managers are Chinese, and they need to coordinate with headquarters back in China. So what time standard do they use? Beijing Standard Time becomes the reference point. When a Chinese-built railway line runs through Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan countries that each have their own official time zones, the operational schedules, the project timelines, and the coordination meetings often align with Beijing time. Chinese workers living abroad for these projects frequently keep their watches set to Beijing time so they can easily communicate with their home offices. Chinese companies operating overseas maintain Beijing time as their internal standard, even when they re thousands of miles away. This creates what some international relations analysts call temporal influence. It's not direct control. These countries aren't changing their official time zones. But there's a subtle way that China's rhythms become embedded in their infrastructure. When the trains run on schedules coordinated with Beijing, when the power plants synchronize their operations with Chinese technical teams working on Beijing time, when the digital systems use Beijing timestamps, it creates a kind of standardization that reinforces China's centrality. The Digital Silk Road, a component of BRI focused on technology infrastructure, makes this even more significant. China is exporting telecommunications equipment, building 5G networks, laying fiber optic cables, and launching satellites for partner countries. All digital systems require precise time synchronization for everything from financial transactions to network routing. When Chinese companies build these systems, which time standard becomes the default in their architecture, think about China's deepening economic relationships with Southeast Asian nations through ASEAN, with Central Asian republics, with African partners. As these economies become more integrated, as supply chains become more interlinked, as more trade happens in real-time digital platforms, the question of temporal coordination becomes increasingly important. Financial markets especially require split-second synchronization. Shanghai Stock Exchange operates on Beijing time. As more international investors engage with Chinese markets, they necessarily adapt to China's temporal framework. This mirrors historical patterns. The British Empire spread Greenwich Mean Time across the globe through its naval and commercial dominance. Many countries adopted GMT or coordinated their time zones with it because Britain controlled so much of global trade. Similarly, the United States established time zones that many countries in the Americas and Pacific adopted or synchronized with, reflecting American economic power. Temporal standardization has always followed economic and political influence. China is simply the latest major power to project its time standards outward through economic integration rather than colonial conquest. We've traveled across 3,250 miles of Chinese territory and 75 years of history to understand a policy that, on the surface, seems almost absurdly simple. One country, one time zone. But as we've discovered, there's nothing simple about it. China's single time zone began in 1949 as a revolutionary declaration. After decades of chaos, fragmentation, civil war, and foreign invasion, the new communist government wanted to send an unmistakable message. China is unified now. One nation, one clock, one collective identity rising from the ashes of a traumatic past. In that historical moment, it made a certain kind of sense. 75 years later, that decision continues to shape daily life for over 1.4 billion people in radically different ways. If you live in Shanghai or Beijing, you barely notice. The policy works seamlessly because you're at the center where it was designed. But if you live in Kashgar or Urumqi in China's far west, you experience the policy every single day as a disconnect between what your clock tells you and what the sun shows you. You navigate between official time and solar time, between Beijing Time and Xinjiang Time, constantly translating between political authority and natural reality. But the story doesn't end at China's borders anymore. As China extends its economic influence through the Belt and Road Initiative, as it becomes increasingly central to global supply chains, financial systems, and digital infrastructure, Beijing Time's relevance quietly expands outward, not through military force or colonial imposition, but through the practical necessities of coordinating with the world's second-largest economy. Chinese-built railways, Chinese-financed ports, Chinese telecommunications networks operating on rhythms synchronized with Beijing. Time zones have always been political constructs. They're not natural laws written in the stars, or human decisions that reflect who has the power to organize society, to set schedules, to define what's normal. Every time you glance at your watch or check your phone, you're participating in a system created by political decisions. It's often made generations ago by people with specific agendas you've probably never thought about. China's approach is extreme in its geographical scope, but it's honest about its purpose. Time is a tool of statecraft. It's a symbol of authority. It's a daily practice of national identity. Whether you see this as efficient governance or authoritarian overreach probably depends on whether you're rewatching the sunrise at 6 in the morning in Beijing or still waiting for dawn at 10 in the morning in Kashgar, living under the same official time, but in completely different realities. As global power continues shifting eastward in the 21st century, as new technologies enable unprecedented coordination across distances, the politics of time will only grow more complex. China's single time zone isn't just a curiosity or an administrative quirk. It's a case study in how seemingly mundane decisions about clocks and calendars actually reflect and reinforce fundamental questions about power, belonging, and identity. In the end, when someone asks, "What time is it?" the real question underneath might be, who gets to decide? And that question matters far more than we usually realize.